Welcome, everyone. I'm Carol Fitzgerald from Reading Group Guides, a website from the Book Report Network, and I am so excited to welcome you to our evening event with Beatriz Williams. I am the host of the Book Reporter Talks to Video podcast series and our Bookaccino live book group events as well. Our guest this evening is Beatriz Williams, and we're going to be talking about Husbands and Lovers, which is her fabulous book that came out last summer in hardcover and it's now in paperback. And yes, you're seeing two different covers, and we're going to be talking about that as well. Our book reporter reviewer, Amy Gwaskowski, had this to say about the book. Husbands and Lovers is a book that doesn't leave you after you put it down. I was drawn back to these characters as I needed to know what would happen, how they would react, and in some cases, how they would heal and find their footing again. I was so invested that I reread the last few pages several times, wanting more words to magically appear and for the novel to continue. All of the love stories here are heartbreaking to an extent and feel very real. So real, in fact, that you might find yourself wiping away stray tears. I love that. I really love that the book meant that much to her. So the format for tonight is going to be as follows. And let me start by noting that this is a book club where we assume you read the book. You're not just coming for the wine, everybody. You're coming because you've read the book. We're going to be talking spoilers. And we're going to begin with this discussion with Beatriz, and then one of our readers will be joining us to talk to us live about Husbands and Lovers. And then I have a couple of questions to ask for an attendee who wanted me to ask on her behalf. And then we're going to go to some questions from the audience that will be in the Q&A. So what I need you to do is, as the evening goes on, drop into the Q&A any questions that you have. Don't put them in the chat because Tom Donadio, editorial director, our voice of God, is going to be looking for them there. And that's where he's going to be taking a look at what's going on. And with that housekeeping behind us, let's welcome Beatriz to the stage. Beatriz, here you come.
There's my cue. Got it.
There's your cue. You got your cue. Very, very good. So good to see you again.
Good to see you. It's always a good day to see Carol.
We always have fun. We always have these conversations that make me smile and make me laugh. So we're going to treat our readers to that as well tonight. But let's start with you giving an overview of Husbands and Lovers. So tell us about this
Oh
book.
my gosh, I haven't given my little book talk in a while. So, and first of all, I apologize. I'm a little feral right now. I'm madly trying to finish up the next book, and like for the past month, I have been it's the book that won't end. I'm like, okay, I'm nearly done. I'm like still writing, and I'm like, the book is not finished yet. I'm doing all this writing, and the book is still not finished. So we're going to have to do a lot of paring down. But in the meantime, I did put lipstick on. I promised Carol I would put lipstick on. But otherwise, you're seeing like very au naturel Beatrice here. Anyway, Husbands and Lovers. So briefly, it's hard for me to speak briefly, but I'll do my best. Husbands and Lovers kind of got its genesis with, kind of my interest in, I think all of my books have this theme where you have this conversation between generations, where you have things happening in one generation, whether it's parents, grandparents, or many generations ago, and the choices they make and the secrets that they keep, then sort of reverberate down the generations to kind of form who my main characters are in the present day or the near present or wherever that kind of main storyline is. So that's always been a fascinating. I'm a history native. I love history. And one of the things that kind of snags my attention a lot as I'm reading through newspapers, magazines, just trying to kind of feed my brain, fill the well, is DNA. And DNA is such a fascinating thing. I was actually a biological anthropology major. I was physical anthropology was my major in college, believe it or not. I've always had that kind of science, science side of my brain. And what I love about DNA is it's literally history that is in the cells of our body.
Mhm.
And we can read that now. And so I'm always reading these articles about like DNA companies. And I found this story about how DNA companies, you send 23andMe, you send your ancestry.com, you send your DNA in and they give you your DNA profile and start matching you with family members. And they're now having to start hiring therapists because people are getting results that they don't expect.
Mhm.
dad was not really dad. Dad was dad's best friend or some other like, thing that really like upends who you think you are. I mean, it's so fundamental to us who our parents are. So I'm reading this story and I found there was this fascinating case study they gave about this woman who it turned out her mother had been adopted out of an Irish orphanage and unlike in most cases it was not a case of an unwed mother, a teenage mother. It was a woman who had had an affair, and her husband had sort of made her give birth and have it, go up for adoption. And that story just kind of got my writerly brain going. So I kind of created a story loosely inspired by that. That is the story of Hannah in the mid-century, early 1950s in Egypt. She is a survivor of World War II. She was in Hungary. She's now married to an older Englishman, but her marriage is not happy, and she has an affair, and that affair produces a child who is born in an Irish orphanage and is the mother of my main character in the present day, Mallory Dunn, who is a single mom. She sends her child off to summer camp. This is not as well, actually, that's right. Spoilers are okay.
Spoilers, go for it.
Sends her child off. And as we know, discovers that he's ingested a poisonous mushroom, so he needs a new kidney. So she's got to go back and rediscover her lost love, who is now a rock star because that's hot, right? And Monk is definitely one of my favorite male characters I've ever created, for sure.
So there you go. This is how the whole genesis of this comes together. I love it. So part of the book is set in the moneyed beaches of a contemporary New England, and there's a nod to another one of your books. So talk to us about that because there's like, oh, wait a second. I think I know this place,
Yeah, so all my books take place, even though I don't really do sequels per se, my books are all kind of linked. They all take place in the same fictional universe. And at one point, I think in 2018, was when my book, The Summer Wives, came out. And that was set on an island I called Winthrop Island, that those in the know will recognize as having been inspired by the real life Fisher's Island, which is an island literally like 3 miles off the coast of Connecticut, although it's technically part of New York. And there's nowhere to, it's like, 6 or 7 miles long and a few miles wide. And there's literally nowhere to stay overnight. There's nowhere to have dinner other than the two clubs that are on the island, the private club, one on the private end of the island and one on the public end of the island. You can guess, the tensions between those two. And there's nowhere to shop really. There's a few there's a kind of tiny little village center with a library and everything. It's very hush hush. Like these are people who think that Nantucket is like flashy, which I think Nantucket's getting there anyway. And Martha's Vineyard, very flat. These are not Hamptons people. Some of them are like extraordinarily wealthy, but they choose not to be in that environment where there's a lot of conspicuous displays. And I thought, what a fascinating culture. And so I wrote The Summer Wives, which takes place in kind of that mid-century period when it was really an interesting kind of like transformational moment for that aristocratic WASP culture, because all of a sudden, even though you were kind of at the top of the pile, you were actually losing cultural currency. You were kind of, at your zenith, though you didn't know it. And all these sort of social things were taking place that were kind of making you a bit irrelevant. Even though we love preppy culture, these are it's not what it was. There is no like automatic lock that your kid is getting into Harvard anymore, and that's like really shocking and disturbing to a lot of WASPs. So I thought this would be a really interesting culture to try and portray, and so I did this mid-century one, and then I returned to it again in the summer of 2023 with The Beach at Summerley, which was my Cold War thriller that takes place in mid-century Winthrop Island. And then, so for Husbands and Lovers, I returned to it, but this time in the present day. So if you have read the two previous Winthrop Island novels, and I hope you do, because I've got a lot of college tuition I'm paying for right now with my children. It's set in that pure. It's set within that circle of families. So a couple of main characters in The Summer Wives in the Beach at Summerley. This is their grandkids who are like Monk Adams is the grandson of Clay Monk, who spends a lot of the Summer Wives pining after Isabel Fisher. And actually, the book that I finished, that and just I know we'll be talking about this later, but Isabel Fisher and Clay Monk actually have a daughter who is a main character in my next book that is coming out at the end of July. So I love playing in this kind of fictional universe where you don't have to have read the previous books, but but they're all kind of in that universe together. And so if you have read earlier books, it's kind of neat to see how the families have evolved over the generations, which again, as that's a big theme for me.
And it's nice to be at the beach all winter. It's nice while it's snowing outside or cold, you're at the beach.
Yes,
Huh?
and it's surprisingly easy to conjure, even if
That's
you live
so
in
easy.
winter.
Easy
I
to
live
do.
not too far away from Fisher's
Yeah.
Island, actually. So it's very, that whole culture is very like present to me, certainly while I'm writing.
So you typically don't write in present day or anytime, and this time
I
you did
I've
this.
had a
And
few dips of the toe into the present day. This is the first time there's been I think, other than kind of overseas, but that was also sort of time traveling, where the bulk of the book, the primary narrative takes place in the present day. Yes.
yeah, so
And
there
that's
you go.
the
There you go.
DNA piece. Like you can't really do the DNA piece without having this modern day setting. So
But the other time period is Cairo in 1951. What attracted you to writing about that particular time period, setting it then, besides the fact it works in the book going backwards for
yeah,
time?
originally. Well, in the original story that I read, and again, I never went back to read that piece again. I think it was like in a Wall Street Journal, one of their weekend long form stories from several years ago. I never went back to reread that. So I can't remember exactly what, the real story was, but I remember that the hotel that it had taken place, the affair, she had had an affair with a hotel manager in some country that was part of the kind of British Empire. And that resonated with me a bit. My father was actually born in Calcutta. I have very, actually fascinating backstory to my father's side. And I won't go into that now because that's, but that, my grandparents were, in that whole scene in Calcutta in the 1930s and 40s. And it's a really kind of a fascinating thing. And it's something that kind of, has some meaning to me. And so, I wanted to kind of put that in there. It was a very interesting period because, again, as with the Summer Wives, the British Empire is now in decline. And you have a man in Hannah's husband who grew up believing that he was the center of the universe, that he's a British man in the Foreign Service and the world revolves around him. And all of a sudden, it's kind of not that way. Everyone wants their independence, the ungrateful wretches, and so that is really affecting him. If you see how he kind of changes from when Hannah first meets him to where we are in the 1950s in Cairo. So I wanted to do Cairo, I guess kind of circling back to Cairo is because Egypt is a very interesting case. It wasn't actually part of the British Empire, but you had Suez. And I was kind of fascinated by that all these sort of mid-century colonial moments, and Suez was kind of the big one. It
Mhm.
was going to be set around the Suez Crisis, which is in 1956. And one of the things that's interesting to me about Suez is that that crisis hit its kind of climactic few days at the same time as the Hungarian Revolution of
Mm.
1956, when the Hungarians were trying to usurp the Soviets. And because of what was going on in Suez and everything kind of coming together at the same time, the Hungarian Revolution was thwarted and the Soviets, reasserted control. And I thought this is and that's why we ended up having Hannah be Hungarian. Uh, but then, as I'm like, okay, hotels, obviously it's got to be Cairo. If you're in Cairo, it's got to be Shepard's Hotel. He's got to be a hotel manager at Shepard's. But guess what? Shepard's burned to the ground, as we learn in the book, in 1952 during these riots and fires that take place in downtown Cairo in January of 1952. So I was like, oh, well, actually, that's kind of a neat if you're sort of thinking you're putting your storytelling hat on and you're building towards a climax, that is a really cool climax where stuff changes irrevocably, and that's what you want in your, your arc. So I was like, let's move the action. And what a fascinating period too, and what a moment. So I changed the action to that winter of 51, 52, and that was kind of how that evolved. And it's funny, it evolved, but I kept the Hungary piece because I was already committed to Hungary at that point. And also to that Soviet presence in Hungary. And I think we spend a lot of time, and rightfully so, talking about how terrible the Nazis are and Hitler, but we don't talk enough about like the Soviets and Stalin and the
Mhm.
havoc and that is so important right now because of what's going on in Ukraine, to be like, oh, this is the same stuff that was going on
Mhm.
as the Soviets went into Eastern Europe. This is what happened. So yeah, so I kind of was trying to tie all that stuff together. I'm always trying to reach for all these different themes and threads, and hopefully I can manage to weave them together, by all at the same time, at the right point in the book, and just give you that sense of a real storytelling satisfaction.
So, did you go to Cairo? Did you spend time there?
I did not. It's interesting. Cairo is definitely one of those places. And again, I have four kids, and I'm the primary. I am not only the only financial provider. I am also kind of a primary parent as well. It's very hard for me to get away,
Hmm.
and I use a little bit that as an excuse, but like for me to go to Cairo would be challenging in a number of ways. But the other thing is that Cairo is one of those places where, partly because I mean, Shepherd's doesn't exist. It would not be
Hmm.
helpful for me to go and be like, oh,
Hmm.
I'm standing on the spot where Shepherd's was. That's not going to help my research much. Cairo itself has changed so much since, the British had that presence there. Um, the street names have all changed. Everything's changed. The buildings are not the same. The buildings have changed. Everything, the city has grown enormously. So it would be a kind of, from a romantic perspective, kind of fun and interesting for me to be there. But what I need to know, which is to say what Cairo was like in 1951 and 52, I was not going to be able to find just by traveling to Cairo in, 2022.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, we're going to have Debbie Moore join us right now. Debbie is in Syracuse right now. She divides her time between there and Myrtle Beach, and she joins us at every one of these events and always
Oh
asks
my
very
goodness.
insightful questions. So, Debbie, take it away.
Debbie, have I seen you at one of those Litchfield book luncheons, or do you ever go to
Oh,
those?
I just found out about those this last
Oh
winter
my
when I was
gosh.
down
Well,
there.
well,
So next time
I
you're there.
I think that is on my book tour schedule. And by the way, I want to add, as I was watching all these locations fly by in the chat of where everyone was from, it was very exciting to me. I know I am from the West Coast. I saw a ton of California people there. All you California people, heads up. I will be going to California on book tour this year. Yay. So September, I think 13th in Corte Madera, I'm going to Book Passage. So if you're anywhere near Marin, and believe me, I don't come out often to California, so make your plans now. But also, I saw someone from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I have a son who's at Franklin and Marshall, so whoever's in Lancaster, hi. I'm down there a lot. I love it. So anyway, had to say that. But yes, Debbie, I will count on seeing you at that luncheon in Myrtle Beach in, I think, in the middle of August.
Oh, I won't be there then, unfortunately. I'm there in the winter.
Oh,
Uh,
you're letting me
uh,
down here, but
I
I can
know, but you'll
understand
come
Myrtle
back.
Beach be a little warm in August.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, I loved your book. And as Carol was telling you before we started, I wouldn't have found this book if it hadn't been for Carol. So,
Oh,
thanks to Carol for that.
hey,
But
Carol.
I was wondering, I have a couple of questions for you. Why did you include the incident where Jake was cheating on Paige? Because I didn't think it added a lot to the story. Was it because you wanted to show that nobody has a perfect life and Paige kind of went around thinking she had a perfect life?
That's a little bit of it, yes. And the other thing is that I think one of the themes that goes through all of my books is how could I phrase this? Um, who you marry matters.
Hmm.
And um, it matters a lot. And this is not to sound sort of like tradwifey in any way. But it can make the difference between happiness and not happiness, and achieving your dreams and not achieving your dreams. And when I write my male main characters, one of my one of the things that I'm really setting out to do there is to think about what makes a good man. And how do we find good men? How do we know where they are and how to find them, and what makes a good man? And I think obviously one of the primary things we want is loyalty, and to know
Mhm.
that you're not going to be betrayed. So one of the ways that you can create a character or describe a character is by that juxtaposition. So there is a juxtaposition between Monk, who is very loyal, and Jake, who turns out like not to be loyal, and that reversal of the sisters, where Mallory has been betrayed, and needs needs to have that feeling of safety, and that that she can trust someone, and Paige thinking she can trust someone and realizing that that she can't trust him after all. That was its juxtaposition is one of the things that I like to play with a lot in my books, to bring out the themes that I'm trying to show instead of tell.
Hmm.
I loved Hannah. And she was kind of a surprise character to me. I mean, it was like she just showed up in the middle of the book, and I'm going, oh, well, this is a real change. But why did you start her story in 1950s Cairo as opposed to her previous life with Janos?
So, uh, partly because, and I interestingly, I actually had more of that sort of Janos bit, when I was, when I was originally scripting. So I always write the thing that takes place in the past first. And Hannah was a tough one for me because when you have a character who is so guarded, who does not want to reveal herself to other characters, because she's been hurt, because, she has developed all these defenses, it is also very hard for me to get to know her. It's hard to explain because I develop characters through what they say and what they do. And when they're being guarded with other characters, not wanting to reveal themselves to other characters, I can't get in there. The way I figure out who Hannah is by exploring her past and finding out, well, why is she so guarded? Why did she marry this man that she didn't love? Why is she putting up with him all this time? And why does she finally crack? Why does she finally allow herself to be vulnerable again? So there was actually a much larger piece about Janos and this amazing love story that she had had before the war. I had to cut that back. It was just getting too long. And it was, I always was going to have, because, the main thing that happens, the important thing is that Hannah has this child who becomes Mallory's mother. So I needed to, when you're storytelling, you have to focus in on starting the story at the important moment. And the important moment is that she meets Lucian and she falls in love with him and has this affair with him, and they conceive Mallory's mother. And so the story with Janos, we find out in bits and pieces because, that's, we really have to start for that moment in her life that is this turning point moment for her. And you can't tell the whole story, but I try to tell enough so that you can understand who she is, because this, it's really about, again, how these choices and secrets then echo down the generations, so that Mallory is dealing with the exact same things that her grandmother is. There's no coincidence that I have Mallory go to visit, the place where her mother, or her grandmother, where Hannah gave birth to her mother, because they were both in the same situation. They're both giving birth without the father of the child present. And to go through that, I think, as a woman, is probably the scariest thing you can do, to give birth alone, to feel like you have to do this on your own as a single mother. Uh, and so that was just really important for me to show that, the things that you hand down to your children, but you also hand down the strength to do this. And that's what what Hannah gives to Mallory.
Yeah, I just thought it was a beautiful story. And you did get to understand Hannah more as
Yeah.
you added little pieces of her life together.
Yes.
Okay, well, I understand,
Ah,
what this
yes.
means to her.
I'm
But I
I'm
like
always trying to show these things instead of tell. I don't like to sort of have these long soliloquies where she describes why she's feeling the way she is. I want the reader to figure that out based on what the character is saying and doing. And that's where it becomes so challenging and rewarding as a writer, because you have to make every word count. Every little thing that's in there matters for some reason. And that's the part I love. That's what I'm in right now, is just like boiling everything down to its essence right now.
Yeah, and I think as a reader, you like, at least I do, is like figuring that out in pieces and
And
little
I
by
love
little
reading
understanding
as
the
a reader.
character better.
Yes.
So great. Um, was there any historical significance to the cobra-shaped bracelet? Did they actually use those during that time to carry
They
secrets?
might have. So I had two books that were actually more than two books, but two books that were literally, Cold War spycraft was at the heart. And I did such deep dives. This is for Our Woman in Moscow and for The Beach at Summerlee. I did not take the Cobra bracelet from a real life inspiration, but I do know that the ingenuity was pretty incredible, and the ability to hide messages, to hide film, photographs that you'd taken that film, and hide it in everyday things. And I mean, there's some truth to the whole James Bond stuff, like gadgets, objects, things that you wore, things that no one would ever suspect were carrying messages, were the best way to do it. So the exact Cobra. Now, the reason why I put the Cobra bracelet in there to begin with is because artifacts are such a great way. If you're doing a story that has this generational conversation going on, it helps to have what I call an artifact, an actual physical object that
Mhm.
ties the two generations together. And jewelry is obviously a great way to do it. I was, and I can't, I used to actually, I just remember now, and it was not a hollow kind of a gold thing. It was more of a, one of those things that twists, it's like a more material feeling.
Mhm.
My grandmother had actually given to me, I don't know whatever happened to it. And it was a snake. It wasn't necessarily, it wasn't a cobra. It was just a gold snake. And I think that must have, and I literally just remembered this now, like you have these childhood memories that come. I was like, oh, I actually did have a snake. No wonder. But it actually came about. I had a fox bracelet because so writing Our Woman in Moscow, I had a tough time naming my FBI agent, and I was writing it during that COVID spring. I was out running and everything, like the wildlife was everywhere, and I live out in the country anyway. But all of a sudden, and there was this fox that kept crossing my path as I was out running in the morning, until finally I was like, oh, you want me to name that character after you, don't you? That's why you keep running across my path. So he became Sumner Fox. And while I was getting ready to do book tour, I found this kind of jointed fox bracelet that kind of wraps around your wrist from my favorite jeweler, J. Crew. And it was on clearance. It was perfect. And I love that bracelet so much. I actually just recently gave it to my daughter, who is now at boarding school. So yes, please buy all the books. I'd appreciate it. It's a horsey boarding school that actually appeared in The Summer Wives, and my sister and my husband's grandmother had gone there, so that's why I put it in there. And all of a sudden, my daughter's like, "Wait, there's a boarding school where you can ride horses?" So here we are. But anyway, they divide them into foxes and hounds. It's in Middleburg, Virginia, which is hunt country.
Mhm.
No, she was chosen as a fox. That's because her grandmother was a fox. So I gave her my fox bracelet. So I no longer have it. But as I was writing this book, and I happened to have the bracelet on, and I was like, oh, that can be my artifact, this bracelet. And then I started thinking, oh, what are the things we can do with this bracelet that makes it actually important to the plot?
Yeah.
So it's kind of how that came about.
Oh, it was great. I mean, it was a really interesting bracelet, and I loved Our Man in Moscow. Your
Yeah.
book there.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you very much. I can't wait to hear more about your new book, and
Oh, thank you.
hopefully
Thank
sometime
you.
you will be in Myrtle Beach in the winter, and I will get an
I
opportunity
well,
to.
it's rare, but when I'm there, I'm usually there because I also write books with my dearest friends, Karen White and Lauren Willig, as Carol knows, and that we those usually tend to come out over somewhere over the winter period. So I'm more likely to come with the two of them, which is, as Carol will tell you, just really kind of boring and
Oh,
blah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
No
exactly what she
wine,
said.
no wine, no joke. And they can't go anyplace cold because Karen refuses to have cold weather.
And we
She
have
just
our book tour
refuses.
entirely in the South if we're,
I'm
She,
anywhere
good with Karen. I'm
between
on
Labor
Karen's
Day
side.
and Memorial
they
Day.
took her someplace cold once and she said, never again. No fireplace for me, So
I'm with her. I'm totally with her.
Debbie,
Thanks very much, Beatrice.
thanks as always for
Thank
joining
you so
us.
much, Debbie. I really appreciate the questions. I hope to see you in Myrtle Beach.
Yes, you
Figure it
too.
out.
Thank you.
So here are two questions from Bobby Statman, who is from Loveland, Ohio.
Mhm.
First thing she asks is, what happened to Hannah's husband after he drops her off at the convent to have the baby? Any idea?
Uh, he's no longer relevant to the plot. I mean, he obviously comes, he wants to get her back, but she's no longer there. She's absconded with her. It's so funny. A lot of readers miss this. I thought it was, I guess, because like these are sort of moments when you're paying attention to other stuff. I guess it's a magician's trick. But it was pretty plain that it was, this countess that she knew back in Budapest who got her a message, and right before she leaves to go to Shepherds for the last time, remember she sends that message off to the woman, and so that's how the woman finds her and lifts her out of the convent. Because I'm no longer answering that question on social media. I'm like, guys, it's in there. Don't ask me questions that are already answered in the book. I'm just like, it's page 244 or whatever, just look.
So funny. And she also asks, who's the woman who takes Hannah from the convent to the
Well,
resistance movement in
there we
Hungary?
go. Yes.
That
We
one too?
it happened. Yes, I can't remember the page number, but it is that woman. That's the whole point of that whole interaction in the hotel in Alexandria where she runs into someone that she knows from her past. And that woman is in touch with her, basically saying, "Hey, we're part of this whole anti-Soviet movement in Hungary right now. Can you help?" And so when she's making her exit strategy, that's when she sends that message to the woman. You do have to pay attention. There's other stuff going on. So I think it's like those magician's tricks, where like it's, like you're just sort of pointing somewhere else. So they're not paying attention to what she's actually doing in that moment.
Okay,
But it's
interesting.
there.
You've had that question
I
before.
don't want people to get, because then people get mad if they like guess it before it happens. They're like,
Okay.
well, I figured that out already. So I try to hide stuff, but then people are like, wait, I don't get it. So it's a bit tricky trying to manage that. So I
So,
apologize if you didn't see it because the plot was moving along somewhere else at the time.
but you just have these page numbers, page 246, page 244, whatever
That's
it is.
actually what I need to do. I don't know if it is page 244. I can
Whatever.
check. It might be a different page depending on whether it's paperback or hardcover. But
But when you start getting the question, like, wait a second, I've had authors say to me, I never thought about this question before. Like, wow, does that what happened? And they said, you're
every
relearning
so
your own
often,
book,
one will kind of find, I wouldn't say a plot hole, but you can't tie off every single loose end. I mean, what happens to her husband? Who cares? I mean,
Mhm.
honestly, she ditches him. He's no longer in her life. He's no longer relevant. I mean, I don't really even have, he clearly just, dies a cold, lonely death. I mean,
Okay.
which is what he deserves.
That's exactly where he's going. So let's talk about toxic death cap mushrooms and how you came up with that as part of the plot. I mean,
Well, okay, so there is a bit of a backstory there. I am known among my friends and family for not really appreciating mushrooms as I should. I do like truffles. Like give me some truffle fries and a glass of champagne and that's all I need in life. But like an actual physical mushroom, like eating a mushroom, and I can like pureed is okay. Like if it's in a sauce or something, I don't mind the flavor. Like I'll put mushrooms in my stew and just not eat the mushroom. So
mhm.
just the actual. I think it goes back to childhood. I don't know. Maybe I was like poison. Mushrooms are poison. I shouldn't eat them, and so that connection. I don't know. Don't know why. I'm just not a mushroom fan. So I'm always so, like all of us, when we're out there on the internet, just wasting time, we always like to click on the stories that kind of reinforce our own beliefs, right? I
Mushrooms
mean,
are not
what is
good.
the fun in somebody proving you're wrong about something? No, you want to like be proven right about things. So I clicked on this story, and it was when the guy who he wrote, what was his name now? I can't remember. My brain is I'm in like I said, I'm
Is
in
this
dead.
Nicholas Evans and the Horse
Yes,
Whisperer?
of course,
Yes.
Whisper. Thank you,
Nick,
Nicholas.
yes.
Because I kept wanting to say, yeah, I kept thinking of the wrong Nicholas. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, that's him.
anyway, Nicholas Evans, Horse Whisperer, which was that big book, I think late 90s. And after he had his great big book, he obviously got to live the life he always dreamed of. And he, at one point in the early 2000s, he was
Mhm.
out. And the reason why this came up is because he died, a few years ago, not
Mhm.
of this incident. He
Mm-mm.
was
He had a heart
fortunate.
attack. Dick was a
Yeah.
friend of mine. Just so you know, he's
Oh,
a
he
friend of
was.
mine.
Okay, so you know this
Yeah.
story. He got
Yeah.
chlorodyne for wild mushrooms, which I
Yep.
could have been like, Nick, honey, not a good idea. And they accidentally picked a death cap mushroom, and he went into renal failure.
Hmm.
And
Like
and
that.
his
Hmm.
daughter who donated the kidney.
Hmm.
And I'm always sort of seeing these stories and being like, oh, that's dramatic. That's something that would make a good. I know I'm a ghoul. We're all ghouls, novelists.
Hmm.
Like we'll be driving down just the interstate on a road trip, and we'll pass like a woodsy area, and I'll be like, oh, that's a really good place to hide a body. Like these ghoulish thoughts. And there was that horrible incident, like someone was at Yellowstone Park, and where you have to stay on the boardwalks and not go into like the hot springs, and he went into the hot spring, and not like there was not enough of him left because the body dissolves because these
Hmm.
things are acidic, and it's a horrible story. And I felt terrible for him and for his family, although he shouldn't have gone off the path. But then like the writer part of my brain was like, oh, another good way to dispose of a body. So I apologize. We're all very dark and ghoulish. It's our job. But yes, so I see this story and I am like, obviously, oh my gosh, what a horrible thing to go through. But then I'm like, but also makes a really good story. So
Hmm.
that kind of combined with my whole DNA thing, like, well, what if you don't know a lot of family members and you need to find more family members? And that's how you find out about this tangled family history that you have, because otherwise you wouldn't have gone on DNA because you don't want anyone finding you.
Right.
Um, so yeah. Yes. So that's kind of how the mushroom piece came into it, because I'm always trying to find ways to show that mushrooms are just a bad idea. Just a
Hmm.
really bad idea.
I remember I wrote Nick and I said, I haven't heard from you in a while. And he goes, this is the message back. Google my name and mushrooms and you'll understand. And I was
Oh,
like,
I feel
what?
so badly.
And
I
I
feel
went
so,
and I read it and I was like, and then he was on dialysis and he was coming to the United States. And I said to him, Nick, if you're on tour and you still need to know dialysis, we're going to have to figure this out. And
yeah.
I knew somebody who could help him, but I said he needs to bring his diagnosis. Like he needs to bring what it was so like crazy
Yeah,
times to come on
it's
tour and do
complicated.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people are like, well, why did Mallory wait so long? Well, partly because, and if I had written the book a year or two later, because I needed it to be in the present day, if I'd written a year or two later, there would have been less time. But I had a COVID problem because
Hmm.
it has his incident right before COVID. So we're going to go into COVID, and don't forget, if you have a kidney transplant, I mean, you are immunocompromised.
Right.
And so it's if you're in the middle of a global pandemic, that's a bad time to be really immunocompromised. So
Yeah.
and so I had to kind of juggle that, and because Mallory is a fierce mother, but she's also very protective, and she has to make a choice, like which is the least worst option here. That my son now comes into the control of somebody that I know you know is not someone I want him to be around,
Hmm.
because and what if her son is actually, what if the father is actually this man who sexually assaulted her?
Hmm.
These are very difficult things, and I think Mallory is looking for the best option here, because she does not want her child to be dragged into this life and this world, and for this man to have a claim on her son.
Hmm.
Uh, so you notice that it's only after the father dies that she agrees to do the DNA.
Right.
And she can now go find Monk and tell him, this is your son.
So is Monk based on any rock star?
I know this is the sad thing. Everyone's like, oh, so which singer are you thinking of? And I'm like, here's the deal. So I grew up, and again, I just had very weird parents. And so our summer vacation every year was a week at the Shakespeare Festival in Ashland, Oregon. And then in the winter, we went to the Seattle Opera. So this was I was really sitting at the far end of the cafeteria table with no one to talk to, because fourth grade, they're like, well, we had to do this thing where who's your favorite singer, male, female. And I was like, Placido Domingo and Renata Scotto, and then it was like your favorite actor, actress. I'm like, Placido Domingo and Renata Scotto, these were my cultural references. So and yes, I had a teenage period where I was like, this was like in the 80s, so they're still playing the music now, but so I went through that, but once I kind of graduated from college, I again kind of signed off of popular music. So I know Taylor Swift is out there. I have so much admiration for her, but I'm not sure I would actually recognize a Taylor Swift song if it played on the radio. I'm really sorry. But so he really was a creation of my completely of my own imagination. And not based on anyone that I know, really, not based on any celebrities that I know. He was one of those characters, and I love it when, if Hannah was someone who's very hard to get to know, the instant I even thought of Monk, I knew who he was. And unusually for me, because I had to write, because I was, pitching a new, my agent and I decided after many, many books with HarperCollins, it was time to get kind of a fresh start. So I was creating a partial manuscript. So unusually for me, I had to write part of, that story that takes place in the past. And then kind of stop after a few chapters and then start writing, the part that takes place in the present day. So the first scene that I wrote about Monk was the scene outside the boarding school when she and her mom drives up, and her mom like wolf whistles or whatever, and she's like dying of embarrassment, and Monk comes over, and he's so cool, he's so awesome, he's just such a good person, and I just was like, I knew exactly what he was going to say. I could hear his voice in my head. I love it when I get a character like that, where I just immediately connect with them. And I think, I just referring to that wonderful, review in Book Reporter, that was exactly how I felt with, I spent months after I finished that book, just like writing additional epilogues in my head, because I couldn't go. It was just so real, and Mallory and Monk, and it was so real that I literally for months afterward, I would just like, if I was trying to go to sleep at night, I'd be like, let's write another epilogue, and suddenly I'm in my happy place with Monk and Mallory, and those characters were just so incredibly real to me, and I like that last half of that book with their story was just one of the easiest things I've ever written, because I just knew them so well, and the arc, their emotional arc was just so it was just in my head, it was just right there. I didn't have to like think about it. It was just there, and I love it. It's like taking dictation from God. I'm just like,
I love that, taking dictation
and
from
I'm
God.
just here to describe it.
So here we got two covers of this book. Okay, this one came out last summer, June. I want to say
it was end of June. Yes,
end of June.
And
this paperback came out April.
Yes.
Where do I go? This way.
It comes out a little later, but
Okay.
they wanted to give it a really, because it was one of those books. It did not get one of the big, book club picks or anything, but it just had this momentum that just, I think it was just that word of mouth, and people just kept buying it, which is wonderful. So the publisher was very excited, and they wanted to, but one of the comments they know, and I do not go on reader review sites because I'm too sensitive. And I will the only thing I'll focus on is, like any negative comments. So my publisher does that for me. And I guess one of the feedback things was like, loved the book. What's with the cover? It doesn't really relate to the book. It's eye-catching, and it gives, summer reading, but it you're reading the book and you're like, this is not the book I thought it was going to be. And for most people, they were like, it's even better than I thought it would be based on the cover. But some people were like, you're lucky I even picked this book up because this is not the kind of book I read. And then I read it and I loved it. And but the cover, I had to like hide the cover so people wouldn't know I was reading a summer novel, and so we thought, well, let's give it a different look and see if that helps connect people, the cover and the story a little better. So it's so funny. I think they must have gone to my website. So I had this amazing local marketing person who had been this big shot in New York, and she decided to move out to the country and start her own firm. And they did amazing work. They did a beautiful job. I literally have my website redone in 2017, I think, and it's still got the same. I haven't had to redo it. It's still so beautiful. But I think they literally went to my website and captured that look. It's not the same photo, but it's the same look that is on the homepage of my website because I know I was looking at it going, wait a minute, I feel like,
Did you cheat?
No, but in a really good way.
You're
Like,
right.
wow, why not go and sort of figure out because they went through so much, like figuring out my brand and everything, doing that whole piece. And so that's what they came up with. So I feel like, hey, that is what I'm trying to capture is that sense of that timelessness, that New England feel, that timelessness, that sense that you're entering a big multi-generational story with lots of tangled emotions. So I certainly hope it's funny. Now I look at them side by side, and obviously the one with the woman on the swimsuit in the swimming pool has a more like grabs the eye more. But I think this one, I hope, will help to introduce a whole set of readers that maybe didn't think this would have been their kind of book, and I think it's partly the title. You have a alluring title like that. When we came up with that title, I was thinking like, I was vibing like D.H. Lawrence. I mean, I was like, and I didn't realize that, it actually, came off being, salacious, really. So, or I mean, obviously somewhat salacious, definitely, something that would, attract pique your curiosity that way. But I guess that plus the woman in the swimsuit was giving just too much of a sexy, sexy summer book vibe. So we're hoping that the new cover will help bring a whole new audience to the book.
Well, you know what else too? That was July, and this is April. If you brought this book out in April, or I think it was April, right? You wouldn't be like, why are we on the beach? Why are we there? We're not there yet.
Well, and I had that is it's still a summery feeling for the new cover. So I think the idea they really wanted to get that second wind as a paperback and really, hopefully reach again a whole new audience and stay strong through the summer. So
A lot of times the hardcover is the advertisement for the paperback. All the work you do on the hardcover, people start to hear about it and then they say, I want to go get it. Oh, there it is. It's, blah, blah, blah.
a handy beach tote sized edition.
Yeah. So now let's go to our Q&A with our voice of God, Tom Donadio. Tom, do you have any words out there, questions?
Yes, we do have some good questions here. So yeah, there were a couple of people who asked about the cover image and how that was selected. An anonymous attendee, I know you just touched on this a little bit, but an anonymous attendee wanted to know how the title was selected.
Yeah, well, like I said, my original working title for the book was Don't Eat the Mushrooms, which my agent, for whatever reason, told me, you can't call it that, Beatrice. So I'm like, why not? It's, that's the whole theme of the book. No. When you are brainstorming titles, you're literally brainstorming titles. You're just throwing words on the page. And there were a couple of things, like I said, I think I was kind of vibing D.H. Lawrence. I was trying to kind of access that sense of this kind of very complicated stories, of people who are, something that is like a little less straightforward, but still, to me, I mean, sex is important to me, like I feel like, I was an anthropology major. And it is important, like I had a very nice lady come up to me. It was in Myrtle Beach. It was not Debbie, who came up to me and was like, so I know that your new publisher must have made you put in all that sex this time. And I'm like, honey, no one can make me put sex in a book. every word that I put into a book is there for a reason. And what I love about, and I know this is a bit of a tangent, but I will get back to the real question here. What I love about sex scenes is that you can reveal, you're talking about showing instead of telling. It is a moment where people are at their most vulnerable. It is a moment when people who have trouble expressing how they feel about someone can express it. It can also, that's like in a good sex scene, in a bad, like there's a lot of bad sex in this book, like Hannah and her husband, like there's some very visceral bad sex going on. And that, again, I was trying to show who he is by how he is making love to his wife and how she views the marriage by how she reacts to it. And it's very important. And it has to be visceral because that's how you get to that truth that is going on in their marriage. So I don't think that sex is a tawdry thing to put into a book. It's not there to be salacious. It's there to reveal a truth. And so that is always my, but I love you. It's such a great tool for showing instead of telling. So I put the sex scenes in when they're important to the narrative. So husbands and lovers, because, I do not want to shy away from this being a book that has sex scenes in it, so I'm not going to shy away from that. So husbands and lovers, again, like I said, I was vibing like sons and lovers, but also I was thinking a little bit, and again, I'm in brainstorm mode. So it's very like, it's not overthinking things. I think I was thinking of, so I'm a big Patrick O'Brian fan. He's sort of my touchstone for historical fiction, and which you would not, it's all about basically men in the British Navy in the Napoleonic era. Like you wouldn't think this would be something that is just completely like I can't put them down when I'm reading them. And one of the things that then they're giving toasts like in the gun room. They will first toast is always to the king. The loyalty toast. And then it's usually to wives and sweethearts, and then or mistresses. And then someone always pipes up, and may they never meet. And which is like cute and funny and always stuck in my head because like, oh, they're so witty. But then it was a little bit of like kind of turning that table a little bit, like, not just the men, but also women, so to husbands and lovers, and may they never meet. But I don't think that's not something that most readers are going to connect with, but that's how I kind of came up with the title, kind of bringing those two ideas together. And my agent was like, I love it. And I'm like, oh. She's like, no, she's like, no, you have to call it that, and I'm like, okay, I put myself in her hands, and the publisher loved it. So that's where we are now. You can argue back and forth. Does this, give the reader the right idea about the story and what the story's about? Does it sound too salacious? It didn't feel salacious to me when I was coming up with it because these were the kind of the ideas that I had going into it. But I can see why people would say that feels like a salacious title. So we're all right. No one's wrong here. It's, we all have they're emotive words. You always want to put emotive words in your title because that is what, it's why there were so many books with, the words like woman and, girl and these things and wife, these are all words that are very emotive to us. So we connect to those titles.
And that's Don't Eat the Mushrooms was not going to be the title.
Not going to be, I know, unfortunately. So this was the number 2 title. So
Tom, what else do you have?
Well, speaking of mushrooms, Tony asks, did you ever think about fleshing out the story of how Sam's ingestion of the death cap mushroom came about? Peer pressure, an accident, intentional self-harm?
That's a
Or
really
is there
good
sort of a backstory to
I knew
that?
in my head would happen, and I did, I think, put in a little clue. She says on a dare. So remember, this is a kid who doesn't have a dad in his life. And so he's going to go into summer camp. I'm always like literally sort of thinking like 8 feet deep when it comes to my characters. He's going to go to summer camp, and he's all these kids who are so confident, and they all go to summer camp together and they have their thing. He's going to want to prove himself to them. And so, they're doing what boys do. They are giving each other stupid dares. And, I dare you to eat this mushroom. And I think she does mention that just very much in passing, when your kid, takes a dare. And remember, he doesn't tell, he won't say. Well, it was very important to me just because we don't get to see that much of Sam, because again, the book can only be so long. I can only put so much in, so I have to do like little clues. But one clue about who Sam is that he won't tell anyone who dared him. He doesn't want that kid to get in trouble. So he never reveals who it was who put him up to this, to eat the mushroom. And so that's kind of who Sam is, because he's Monk's son.
Mm.
Now, I know you alluded to this earlier, but Courtney says, I love your books and was wondering if you're writing any more books with Karen and Lauren.
We currently have our sixth. Oh my God, yeah. So our sixth book is currently in the proposal stage, and it is not a cozy murder mystery in Scotland this time. It was so funny. So many readers loved it because we were like, it is a book that is very heavy on satire and irony. And if you're not someone who's into satire and irony, apparently you hated it. So I apologize. Oh, sorry. We've been over an hour now. I've been yakking on. So my do not disturb just went off. So I'm just gonna have to so I don't want to be dinging everybody all the time whenever I get a message. I'll just put it on for another hour. Hopefully that'll be enough. So anyway, we had so much fun with that one. We had several sequels planned, American Plaid, what happens in I don't know. We had a bunch of titles already planned for the next books, but we decided that we should kind of return a little bit to our roots. So the next one is set in an iconic American city during a season.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Here we go.
Yeah. Hopefully we will get that all sorted out and and have that for you. We kind of put them out every 2 years. So we have no plans to ever stop because these books are really fun to write for us.
Yes, and you don't tell which chapters and which characters you each write. You keep many, many secrets.
That is a deeply classified secret that we
deeply classified. But tell people the name of the last book that you wrote together, just in case they haven't read it yet.
Oh, and I actually, and I swear this actually is a coincidence. I do right here, sitting in front of me it's actually one of the galley copies, but it's called The Author's Guide to Murder. So we get a lot off our chest about the publishing industry, about misbehaving male authors. This book came out right before the whole thing with, Neil. Sorry, my names are
Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman. Sorry. Literally, I can't. The only names I know right now are my characters' names. Neil Gaiman, and when that whole thing came out, and everybody's like, "I can't believe that," I'm like, watch out for male authors who say they're very that they're feminist allies, because they don't mean what you think they mean.
Lying in different ways.
I know.
Lying in different ways.
Like it is an open secret in publishing world that there are, and there obviously there's some amazing, wonderful, truly dear friends of mine who are male authors, but there's also a lot of misbehaving male authors. And so we kind of wanted to put that out there a little bit. People were like, were you talking about so and so? And I'm like, he's a composite. Yeah. He's a composite. But we had a lot of fun with that, and we really had a lot of fun creating these characters. It was the first time that all 3 characters are on the page. So if I'm writing my character, I'm also writing Karen and Lauren's characters, even though it's my character that has the viewpoint, but those characters are walking around in the scene. So it was really neat. And to be able to trust them with my character and see what they did, and sometimes would, reveal things about my character that I then fed back into, my portrayal, in the viewpoint. So it was such a great collaborative process. And, we are so excited to get started on the next one.
I'm going to just jump in here for 1 second talking about the 3 of you, because I am so amazed about how supportive the 3 of you are of each other, of you can get in a room and you can't get a word in edgewise. Trust me, guys. Trust me, I've tried. And you sit there and you're
You can't
so
get a word in edgewise.
you're supportive of one another. You really are like, oh, your success is here and da da da, your individual success as well as your group success. And I think it's such an interesting thing in a business where it can be so competitive. And by the same token, you three have found each other. And I think that for the readers, they don't know how competitive the business can be and what a gift it is to have two friends like that, that you can run things by and just go, I don't know what I'm going to do about this, whether it be a question of with a publisher or with a character or with a plot. And you can sit and have a conversation. And I'm just saying, hats off to you guys. You don't need to say anything. It's a huge deal. And for readers, no, that's a very, very special relationship.
Very dear to me. I'm not sure I could have survived this whole, this whole adventure without them. Truly,
Yeah, it's amazing.
knowing that somebody has your back in that
Mhm.
sense is that at any moment, a lot of our text chains start with, may I rant for a moment? And we're like, that's what the text chain is here for, honey. Let's go. Let's rant.
That's right. Let's go. Tom, is there another
Uh,
question?
yes, Jill wants to know, have you read any good books lately? I know you've been very
I've been
busy.
writing. I've been deeply writing. And, we talked about one of the reasons why Patrick O'Brien was right there in front, because the book that I am writing now. So, my next book is called Under the Stars, and that references an incident, a real life steamship wreck that happened off the coast of the real Fisher's Island in 1846. So again, my publisher, that we had such great result with Husbands and Lovers. They kind of wanted me to stay in that kind of Winthrop Island modern day referencing historical stuff. So the one that I am now finishing up is a pirate book, and it references a whole bunch of legends on Fishers itself, but also all around Connecticut and Long Island, rumors, myths of buried pirate treasure. And so I thought that would be a really interesting thing to touch on. And again, because I have had ever since college when I discovered Patrick O'Brien, I'm just like, I am not a sailor, but I'm just obsessed with these books, and I'm obsessed with the sea and that kind of naval piece. So in order to get myself in the mood for this part of the story that takes place way earlier than I've ever written anything before. It's like it's the winter of the Great Snow of 1716 to 1717. So I reread a bunch of Patrick O'Brien. So that is so in my head right now. If you've never read it and you need to pay it. It's an easy read in the sense that there's a lot going on and there's all this plot, and it's very like, you can't stop reading. I have literally chain read where I put one down and started the next. But I mean, it's not, he doesn't condescend to his readers at all. He assumes that you are smart and that you can comprehend a complex sentence and appreciate what that brings to the story. So, it is light reading, but it's not. It's as light as you want it to be. And I just can't get enough. When I started rereading them, I was afraid, and there's 20 of them. And I was afraid, well, now that I write books myself, and I've become a much more critical reader now that I'm doing it myself, and I know what the lazy tricks are, and I know, I know when it's being phoned in and when it just the stories, I know so much more about the craft of writing that I was afraid I would go back and it wouldn't be as good as I thought it was. And I started rereading, and I actually had to stop because I was wanting to read instead of actually write. So but I will mention a few. First of all, Lauren Willig, and I read because I was actually in conversation with her, so I reread her most recent book, The Girl from Greenwich Street, and that's the one about it's this real, true crime, historical true crime, this murder case that was defended. The defendants' lawyers were Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, and it's a
Mm.
whodunit, and it's fat, and it's also is amazing, like bringing these characters to life. And I'm about to on Friday, if anyone is in my neck of the woods, Madison, Connecticut, as a few towns down from me, and I will be in conversation with the one and only Martha Hall Kelly.
Oh,
Yes, her brand new
new
book.
book.
Yes. So I obviously that is I'm reading it right now. It's very hard to get me to read any book at all while I am trying to write. But Martha's Vineyard Book Club, and just a great book. So
Here's a question for you. When you're, and I agree about the Martha, I started listening to it. I started listening because I've more time in the car recently. But here's a question. Your summer book is out what date? And let's do the title again, just so everybody can go
yes,
pre-order or
yes.
pre-plan. So
And
it's,
Monk, by the way, we do have, if you want a little more Monk and Mallory, you get to see Monk and Mallory because there is a this so it's out, it's called Under the Stars, and it is out July 29th. And it goes back and forth between present day Winthrop Island, and I have fictionalized this 1846 steamship wreck, but only fictionalized it. My main characters are fictional who are on it, but everything else is exactly as it was, except right up to the point where they crash on Winthrop Island instead of Fisher's Island. But there's a murder mystery. There's someone who's on the ship because she is evading capture by the Boston police. There's a murder. And then, of course, the detective is on board the ship as well. So there's a murder mystery going on. There's also an art mystery piece because in the present day, we discover some paintings in a trunk in the basement of the Mohegan Inn.
mhm.
Uh, and when Mike Kennedy, who's one of my favorite characters from one of my favorite side characters, I had a lot of people write in and say, "There's so much bad language, all the F-bombs," and I'm like, "But it's Mike, okay? He just,
You
that's
know,
what he talks." Anyway, his long lost daughter arrives on the island and it helps they discover these paintings, and they can't figure out where they're from. So what do they do? Sedge Peabody is there, and he's like, well, I happen to know someone who is an art expert. So they trundle off and go see Monk and Mallory, and Mallory and Monk help them, with this, figure out where the paintings are from. So they are in there, and they have cameos. And I loved putting them in there. I loved revisiting set. I loved Sedge Peabody. And so it was just a great joy to return to that world. And then this like actually turned into a really like compelling, cool mystery. It took me a while to develop it because it's on a ship where very specific things happened
mhm.
historically, and I had to work with the facts on hand. So, but it was, it was the way everything ties together in the end. And the characters, oh, loved these characters so much. And I loved returning to the ones from Husbands and Lovers. So that's Under the Stars, and that is out July 29th.
July 29th. We'll be talking about that more, Tom. Yes, Tom
Sure.
Donadio. Yes,
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we'll
absolutely.
certainly be covering the book and reviewing it when it comes out. Um,
Well,
we don't have any more questions, but Barbara says, I loved the end when the man came to the door. Hannah's son, perfect ending.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think it was interesting. Um, I think I wrote that before. This would have been the fall. So right when I think the Ukraine invasion was happening.
mm,
And, again, for a previous book, I'd done a lot of research on the behavior of the Soviet troops in Eastern Europe at the end of World War II
mhm.
and just atrocities that took place. And one of the things that was very common was they would take children who had been orphaned or just take them from their families, and bring them back to, because part of the whole Marxist project was to you wanted to create this population and and spread Marxism. So they would take these children and have them be raised, adopted by Soviet families. So I knew that was taking place, and what was interesting is that was always the story I had in place for this guy. Had to have one of her children live and come back to her, poor Hannah. And so that was kind of but then of course, in Ukraine, suddenly all these reports, the same thing is happening. They're going by this exact same Soviet playbook where children, babies are being kidnapped and, and sent back to Russia to be adopted. So it's history, as they say, repeats itself just in a different key. So
Ooh, definitely different key. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's always fun. It's always fun. And people, it's this much fun in person. So if you ever get to see her in person, this is really the real Beatrice. This is not
I'm a
just
to right now. Like there's not been a lot of sleep in the month of May trying to get this book over the finish line. So
Yeah, that's exactly. This is exactly. Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine before everybody comes home from school and wants to
it is
hang out.
well that yes, that is the drop deadline. My daughter comes back from boarding school on the 30th, so I literally have to turn it in tomorrow. I'm nearly done. But but yeah, the other thing is like I'm at that stage where I'm so obsessed that it is actually hard to put it away and go to sleep. You know, I really wanted to stay in that world, which is a good thing. It's just hard on me physically.
Physically, but it's also
Point
when
is old enough where I can't just shrug off like a night of getting like 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I have to like
but
make
you
it.
just turn to the children and you go, "Oh, have I told you about Monk and Mallory?" The kids are like, "What?
Well, my
I'm
kids
like,
don't read
who?"
my books. I think they just don't want to go there. They don't want to know that much about mom. So you know, they need me to be mom. So they don't really read my books. But my daughter's in an age now where her friends are reading my book. She's
Mm.
like, my God, mom, my friend couldn't believe it when I told them that you're my mom. You know, she's like, oh, it's my favorite author, or my mom's favorite author. And I'm like, really? That's so neat. So suddenly my daughter is finally appreciating me. She's
But
like,
then you could sit there and say, "So when do they want to come over?"
I know,
She's like,
exactly.
"No, that is not happening."
Actually,
No.
earlier today, one of her friends runs a book club for some community group, and they had picked husbands and lovers. I'm like, do you want me to, just zoom in? And she's like, oh, you would do that? And I'm like, yes. For a friend of my daughter, of course. Yeah.
Yes, of course, for a friend of my daughter's. Did you know who I'm speaking with tomorrow at their book club? Just tell your daughter.
I know. So she's like, actually, it's kind of cool what you do. And I'm like, it's a living.
Yeah, I've been doing this, it's all those
I
times.
I honestly, I am truly, every time I kind of get down, and again, the business can knock you around a bit, but just the fact that I get to do the only thing I ever wanted to do in life,
Mhm.
which is stories for a living, it's just a true blessing to be able to do this for a living. And I'm so glad that there are a few of you out there who want to read what I write.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We look forward to getting your new book. We'll add some more about that when we write the notes, when we send out the video for this. And I look forward to seeing you next time. We'll
Yes,
be there
next
next time.
time.
We'll
I
do it in
need to
July.
definitely
We'll do it in
put
July when the
more
next book comes
down
out.
in October, but I'm sure I'll see you on the book tour trail in the meantime.
Definitely, definitely on the book tour trail. Thank you. And for everybody else, just stick around for a couple of minutes because I've
Everyone,
got
and Californians, mark your calendars. September
she's
13th.
coming. She's coming west. She's coming west. And a few more announcements from us. Tonight's event will be available on YouTube and on our podcast soon, and we'll alert you when it's live. We've also created a new events page on TBR Network where you can sign up for all of our programs. So, just to get you in the loop, our next Bookaccino Live Book Group program will be on Tuesday, June 24th at 8 o'clock, where our guest will be Fiona Davis, and we'll be discussing The Stolen Queen. On our June Bookaccino Live afternoon book preview event will be held on Wednesday, June 11th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And on Tuesday, June 17th, we'll be hosting our summer reading evening program. That's for all the people who work during the day. Yeah, we're doing something for you at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Sign up for these programs. They're all available on our events page on TBR Network. Also, sign up for our events at the Book Report Network newsletter so you never miss an event. And a reminder that we also have more than 220 Book Reporter Talks to interviews with authors, including a longer interview that we did with Beatriz just about this book, or not a longer, but another interview we did with her on our YouTube channel. And it's on the Book Report Network or wherever you listen to podcasts. And with that, thank you. Thank you to Tom Donadio, our voice of God. And thanks to all of you for joining us and wishing you a really good night.